Yes, it is.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Madam Chairman, you are live.
Thank you, Carla. We appreciate it. Welcome to House Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. And we will call this meeting to order. And Barb, if you would please call the roll.
Representative Banks,
Excused.
Representative Harrelson,
Here.
Representative Hunt,
Here.
Representative Jennings,
Here.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Newsom, excused.
Excused.
Representative Sweeney, excused. Representative Winter
Here.
and Chairwoman Flitner.
Here. All right. And so before we begin committee, I'll just remind you to go through the chair. Please, no side conversations while we have people providing testimony. Let's make sure we are attentive and listen to people who are here to give their comments. And so we are first taking up House Joint Resolution 11. And if the good Representative Summers, our Majority Floor Leader, would please join us. Welcome.
Madam Chairman, thank you, and fellow committee members, thank you. And so I bring you House Joint Resolution 11 and ask for your favorable support consideration. And really this comes out of, I think, the frustration that I and many of my constituents and others around the state have with, and our concerns about what a new administration in Washington may or may not do, and how it may or may not impact our sovereignty as a state. And so really what this is a joint resolution requesting the federal government to respect state sovereignty. And for, just to be brief, I'll go to line 8 on page 1, whereas a union of sovereign states established a federal government and delegated limited powers upon that government. Whereas any question as to whether powers not delegated to the federal government were retained by the states was answered with a ratification of the 10th Amendment. And it goes on through some other whereases, and whereas the Second Amendment to the federal Constitution recognizes the right of people to bear arms, and that right shall not be infringed. And then, Madam Chairman, the next one I'm going to visit on is really about federal lands and the importance of that to Wyoming. And that is, Wyoming has been blessed with abundant natural resources which have been developed to create economic prosperity and provide energy independence from foreign nations, thereby providing for the peace, safety, and happiness of all citizens of the United States. And whereas the federal government has recently taken actions limiting the development of natural resources. And it goes on for a few other whereases. And, and I think another one that's important is towards the end, whereas a more perfect union will not be realized by actions of any single department of federal government, cannot be forged by acts of federal government which exceed delegated powers, and should not be tolerated when exercise of those delegated powers harm the welfare of the citizens of states. And whereas all powers inherent in the people and all free governments are founded on their authority. And so then it goes, and now therefore it be resolved in section 1, the current administration of the federal government and Congress should respect the sovereignty of Wyoming and other states. Section 2, the federal government not regulate arms at a national level. And section 3, that the current administration should respect the critical role that federal lands play in Wyoming's culture, recreation, wildlife, livestock production, mineral development, and tourism. And the current administration and Congress work with the state of Wyoming to develop federal policies, land use policies in a manner which recognizes their impacts on Wyoming citizens and implements those policies in a manner consistent with the state's culture. And Madam Chairman, really, I wanted to provide a respectful message, but a firm message that we exist out here in the West, and that we value our rights, and we're dependent upon these federal lands, and that we need to be a partner, not a stepstone.
Thank you, Representative Summers. I appreciate that. Committee questions for Representative Summers? I have a question. You referenced, because I didn't have the opportunity to look up Coyle v. Smith, which is on line 2, page 11. Can you just tell the committee what that was about exactly.
Madam Chairman, to be honest, one of our good attorneys drafted this and I have not reviewed that whole thing.
Okay,
But it basically is the authority of sovereignty of states and the fact that we are a sovereign within the powers of the Constitution and within the powers, of our Constitution, but that we are a sovereign.
so Representative Summers, I think, I mean, I would believe that everybody on this committee probably believes wholeheartedly in this resolution. What do resolutions do though? When we send them to Congress, I mean, we know what the Constitution says, we know about states' rights, but obviously that's getting tromped on daily. What are your thoughts?
Madam Chairman, I just feel I've never been one that didn't believe in the process. And one of the things that we have in our tool bag as state legislators is to draft resolutions to send to others to express our discomfort, our comfort, our fears, our joys. And will this have a great impact? Maybe not, but at least we have a voice, right? If you do not speak your voice, you lose your voice.
Thank you. Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a comment and then a question. I agree. I think it's incumbent upon us as representatives to give the voice of the people that we represent, and this encompasses it to a T. My question is it okay to maybe strike the word current for in other words, in section 1, at the current executive department, I would say that the executive department, because I don't care whether it's this administration, the next, or the previous. I want these rights to be reinforced no matter what administration's in office.
Representative Summers.
Madam Chairman, thank you, and I appreciate the question. And I think it's fine to do that. I mean, I've put in this in the whereas as some of the concerns about what's currently going on. And so if you look on page 3, line 4, whereas the federal government has recently taken actions, and that's kind of why in the therefore be it resolved, I wanted to make it clear that because of these actions that were recently occurring, this is in response to some of those actions. Clearly any administration, you would want these same things, I think, from our state, but it's probably as much as anything, it's about some recent actions that have occurred and our worry about further action, my worry about further actions, Madam Chairman.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to that point, to Representative Knapp, I certainly understand where he's coming from on that. I would suggest not doing that, though, simply because when it comes to these resolutions in general, we're usually focusing on whether it's the current administration per se or a specific issue that's being dealt with at the moment. I mean, we're not, I guess, while it's certainly true that we should always be on guard as a sovereign state for any executive action that comes out of Washington that we've not had, what we feel to be a fair shake in the discussion. When it comes to a resolution, they're by their nature, they're not necessarily aimed at long-term policy. I think that they come as we feel they're needed, and so I guess that's sort of my input on that. Not that I disagree with the premise of it. Thank you.
Further questions for Representative Summers? I just had one question with regard to the definition on page 4, line 21 of arms in section 2, that the federal government not regulate arms at a national level. When you talk about arms, does that roll in also ammunition? And the reason I ask is I've got an automatic 22 and it presently costs about $1 a bullet. And I recognize that that's probably a method that they're going to employ is the increased cost of ammunition. And I'm just curious about that definition.
Madam Chairman, it's probably not defined, but my assumption that ammunition would be under arms. And not only that, but, we talk about different kinds of magazines for different guns. And it's kind of about to me, it'd be about the whole unit.
Okay, thank you,
That's-
sir.
I'm certainly willing to, if you guys want to entertain some amendments to that, that's okay.
Okay. All right, Carla, do we have anybody online from the executive branch that would like to speak to this resolution?
Yes, Madam Chairman, we have Brian Nezvik from Game and Fish, and I'll bring him over. I'm not sure about the other two people. If they are with government, if they could raise their hand.
Perfect idea. Director and General Nezvik, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually here for the next bill you're going to hear. I certainly, I wasn't planning on testifying on this bill. I will offer though, that certainly Representative Summers has identified some issues that we oftentimes deal with when it deals specifically with the Endangered Species Act and problems that we have and challenges that we have in managing wildlife in our state because of some of the policies that are enacted at the federal level that breach on state sovereignty. That's all I've got, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Nesbitt. Questions? I appreciate those comments because I certainly was thinking that myself in terms of the Endangered Species Act and grizzlies and wolves and eagles and what sort of a detriment they've been to our industries here in this state. All right, well, we appreciate you stepping in. Do we have anybody else from the executive? If not, we'll go to the room and then we'll come back to people online.
No, Madam Chairman, nobody else has raised their hand.
Okay, and I see we have a legislator in the back of the room. Representative Fortner, were you here to testify or are you just here? Okay, all right, very good. So anybody in the room, please come forward. Farm Bureau.
Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting firmly in support of this resolution. The question came up, what does the resolution do? At the least, it's a shot across the bow to get their attention that what we do out here in Wyoming is important. The world, somebody said this before, I can't remember who, but the quote that I'd like to use is the world's run by those that show up. And to me, this resolution is a way of showing up. I look at the actions, what the federal government has done. I'll use the timber industry as an example. We're down to 3 fairly decent sized timber mills across the state. Because of not being able to get timber off the federal lands, we've lost, I believe it's 12 mills across the state. That's a lot of people put out of work. That's a lot of resources from the federal lands being used, but also recognize what that's done to private lands. Only where is there a local sawmill does private timber have much value. A lot of people, a lot of my members across the state, it's not worth cutting trees. They have nowhere to take them. You can't haul a tree 500 miles to get milled. And then you look at what's happening just recently, what the impact of not being able to utilize federal minerals. That's going to tie up private minerals as well. So I wholeheartedly support this resolution. I think it's important to get our word back to DC. It helps out our 3 elected representatives back in DC. It can show them what Wyoming thinks and they can use that in their work. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I would sit for any questions from you or the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Questions for Mr. Moline? Thank you. Appreciate
you.
your testimony. Anyone else in the room here to testify to joint resolution?
Madam Chairman,
Somebody raise their hand?
Madam Chairman, we have Mr. Luthi from the governor's office.
Oh, welcome, former Speaker Luthi. We appreciate it. Sorry if I missed you earlier.
Madam Chairman, I would love to say you missed me. Unfortunately, my technical skill was somewhat lacking, and I just barely got in. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Madam Chairman, this is an excellent resolution. The governor has also done an executive order, has written letters. I think we might be looking at some additional executive orders, and we're always evaluating litigation. This is a great opportunity to show that Wyoming is united, both from the administrative point of view and the legislative point of view of these concerning orders that have been coming forth out of DC. So absolutely go forward. We're fully supportive. Thank you.
Very good. Committee, anybody have a question for the governor's office? Boys on the end? No? Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. And please extend our gratitude to the governor.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And Carla, there's no more hands raised, I assume?
That is correct, Madam Chairman.
Okay, then we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Jennings, seconded by Haroldson. So we'll move through the bill. Page 1. Amendments. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do want to talk about section 2. And as I read this earlier, that the federal government not regulate arms at a national level, that the executive department of the federal government work with Congress and the states to review and correct federal actions with infringement upon, it goes on. If the federal government does regulate on a federal level, obviously we have legislation in process to protect, but I think, I do believe that maybe cleaning that up and putting in there, regulate arms or components of, or something of that nature, because you're absolutely right. We have I don't care, it doesn't matter how many arms you own, if you don't have an ammunition to put in that arm, it's kind of worthless at this point. So I agree 100% with your statement. So on line 20, that the federal government not regulate arms, or on line 21, or the components of, and add that in on line 21 as an amendment on page 4 at a national level.
Okay, do I have a second? Seconded by Hunt, moved by Haroldson. So let's discuss that. I think personally, I'd like to have an understanding maybe from our legal department to see whether or not arms would encompass that, because I think if we start to articulate everything that would, I think it might get a little wordy.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion. Representative Hunt.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I think I would agree. I get where Representative Belton's coming from as far as, I mean, not arms per se, but if they regulate ammo, then it's the same thing. I get it. But I do think that, saying more with less is probably the best way to go. And I would point out that I appreciate the language as it's written, that we are saying arms and not strictly firearms. So we're giving it a little bit broader, scope in that respect as well. But anyway, I guess long story short, having seconded the amendment, I would say on and against.
Okay, well, we have an amendment on any further comment? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. We have a second amendment that does protect us in this country. And I know many states that have put massive amounts of regulations upon the components of, and even upon the arms of. I mean, we go directly to the state south of us, and we gained a large manufacturing company in this state due to regulations that state put upon the Second Amendment. and the components of. So I think that, I mean, I agree that maybe we need to look into the legal side. But the intent of the Second Amendment was for us as a people to defend ourselves against the potential of a tyrannical government. And so our founding fathers' goal was for the people to hold or handle or be in possession of the arms that would put them on a level playing field with that of the government. And so I think that how do you starve it out? You starve it out by eliminating the components of. So, I mean, I definitely still feel that we need to move forward with this now. If this is something that needs to be brought as an amendment on the floor after a discussion with legal, I'm totally fine with that as well. If that's what the committee would like to do. I just think it needs to be something we do need to look into.
All right, well, we'll find out. All those in favor, vote, well, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that the term ammunition should be incorporated into this bill somehow. I think that's what we're talking about, and it's not mentioned. I mean, you can get the attorneys involved, and it's hard telling what'll come out, but the term, I think, should be incorporated.
Okay, so you're in favor of Haraldson's amendment. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. This is on your amendment. 3, okay, and opposed? 3. All right, so we'll do some research and maybe bring it back as a committee of the whole amendment. All right, moving on to page 5. Further discussion or comment, committee? Question having been called. Barb, would you please call the roll?
Representative Banks, aye. Representative Haraldson.
Aye.
Representative Hunt. Representative Jennings. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Vice Chair Newsom, aye. Representative Sweeney, aye. Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairwoman Flitner.
Aye.
9, none.
9-0, do pass. Thank you, Representative. Good plan. Good plan. Thank you, sir. Go take a break. Much needed break. Right. Okay, we are moving on to House Bill 227, hunting tag refund or reimbursement, chronic wasting disease. Representative Jennings, the floor is yours. You may choose to move in front of us. That'd be great. And the amendment, great. And you all received I forwarded you the electronic version of the amendment, but if anybody needs to see a physical copy, I have one here.
There should be, I'm sorry. The second one.
For anybody who's online, we're just, Representative Jennings has an amendment. We're just passing out at this point. I have it. Mhm. All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Committee. I appreciate your time for listening to this House Bill 227. And Madam Chairman, would you like me to work in the amendment when we get that far?
Sure.
Okay, so the genesis to this was concern from some constituents that were feeling that there was a opportunity of hunters being disenfranchised and that they would begin to disengage hunting altogether in some of our CWD areas. And so I took that up. I understand that there's some concerns with that. So I wanted to just lay out the pros and the cons to this. This would be if someone were to hunt and were to harvest an animal that tested positive for CWD. And so in the genesis of this with constituents and their concerns, I will relate one quick story for myself. So when I was a youngster back in the Middle East, Mideast, not the Middle East, the Middle East of the country. I grew up hunting ducks, and it was about in the time frame where we started putting point systems on everything and making it very, very difficult to figure out what you just shot, and you had to get that all figured out. And I've thought a lot about this, and that's probably why this one caught my attention, because I grew up before that was so stringent. And as we ran into problems, it became much more stringent. And to be honest with you, I raised 3 kids, none of them duck hunt. And I liked it. I liked duck hunting. I enjoyed it. But I wanted to be able to spend time with my kids and stuff like that. And it fell to the wayside. And so as we're looking at this bill, that was part of the genesis to it is that I had heard concern from constituents. I hadn't heard anything from people saying, oh, look, if we don't do this, I'm done. But the fear is there. And that was what was the genesis to this. So as I look at this, the pros to this bill is that hunters can get up to half of their license or a reissued license. Hunters remain more engaged, and they continue to help the Fish and Game Department to address CWD. There's also an amendment that also gives the picture, and we'll go through that a little bit more as we go through the bill. But the bottom of page 1 on the amendments is the part that it gives it states the help that the commission. The objective of this is to help the commission meet wildlife management objectives. So it's another tool in their toolbox. It's on page 2 that we're not going to open this up, because I think you're going to hear some testimony that there's concern about opening this up, and that is not the intent of this. And I get that there'll probably be other things, and there may be other diseases that come along that we may need to address. And so could it happen? Yeah, it could. We've got volume after volume of laws addressing things that come up. And so it is a possibility, but I was looking at this as being another tool in Fish and Game's toolbox to help the commission meet wildlife management objectives. That's why I chose does and cows, because that's where the management part comes in. We're not talking about boy, I didn't get as big a bull elk as what I wanted. We're not talking about, boy, this deer didn't, satisfy what I was hunting. And so there are cons to this. I'll point those out also, that there's a committee that studied this, and they were concerned about changing the department's view that the state is selling opportunity and not guaranteeing an outcome. And to be honest with you, I agree. That's a policy decision for you guys here today, because we don't sell guaranteed, nor do we want to. I'm not for that. So as we look at the bill, there's it's very short. It adds 2 things to 23-1705. Now, the antelope hunt license, and the director, I think, will get on here shortly. That does not appear to be a problem. Antelope doesn't carry this. And so we're really looking at the 2 game animals that are probably hunted the most in Wyoming, and they're hunted for meat, and they're people that go out there and they put meat in their freezer. And so we're adding section M, which takes on the cow elk. And if you look at your amendment, we're deleting a cow and we're putting antlerless. And we do that several times. And then on line 6, it gives us a statute, references the fee paid, and it adds 23-2-101D to that. Then the rest of that is the licensing fees, $55 for full price and $25 for a youth. And then the person who has shot an animal and it has tested positive has an option to either have a reissued license, and if it were to be in another area, then it would have to be approved by the commission. And the same thing is true at the bottom. That is, it brings the commission in if they want to do something different. So otherwise, they're going to get half of the fee for a cow or a doe. It's the reduced price there. And I think essentially what that does is it brings people to a place where they feel like, you know, I didn't waste my time trying to put meat in the freezer and I have an opportunity. So I see this bill as somewhat akin to a lemon law, if you will. That's probably not a great analogy, but the state should still care about customer service and customer satisfaction. So I would make it akin to if you went shopping and the product that you purchased was defective. We seldom say in society, well, you paid for the opportunity to shop, therefore no refund on what you bought if it was defective. And if we did that, we would not think that those people would be very loyal customers. And so the goal in this is I want our customers to be satisfied, and I want them to come back and purchase tags over and over. And CWD has created a problem. So with that, I would stand for any questions, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Questions, committee? Oh, Representative Jennings, I've got a couple. I mean, presently, do you have any data on the numbers of cow, elk, and does that statewide that test positive?
I do, Madam Chairman. Thanks for that. Although I did not bring it with me because I knew that the director was coming, and he and I talked about this, I believe, last week, and he had the numbers for both cows and does. It's not a high number. We're not currently, this is really more of a preemptive so that we don't start losing hunters buying tags. I like the duck story. I quit. All three of my kids have never taken it up. And so this is more preemptive because there are areas in the state that have more problems than others. And they're not high numbers. And I think the director, when he comes on, can give those to you there.
And why the new language antlerless versus cow or doe?
That was in conjunction with the directors. These are amendments that the agency and I visited about, and they felt like that flowed better into the current statute.
And can you tell me too, and maybe this is a question for the director, but when you do test, and you'd think I'd know this now, but how long before you get a return on that test? How long does it take to get those results?
My understanding is there's a variable time to that. And so you'll see that there is a amendment there on page 2, line 21, that it could go immediately the following season, because say you shot your animal at the tail end of the season, you don't get to go out and poach another animal. So, and then the other thing that I changed, Madam Chairman, is we went from 21 to 22 so that we would give the department time enough to have the rules and regulations out before the next season.
Okay. Further questions, committee? All right. Thank you, Representative Jennings. So we have Director Nezvik online, and so we'll invite him to please come in right now. And then if there's anybody else in the executive branch you'd like to testify, if you just raise your hand so you can speak after Director Nezvik. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. So the good representative bringer of this bill did a good job of outlining what this bill would do. We did have a good conversation last week about some of my concerns and impacts to the agency from this bill, and the amendments that you have before you. I'll try to provide some of the concern that I articulated to him that gives rise to your consideration of those amendments. So first of all, I'll just tell you that the underlying premise that was outlined by Representative Jennings about concerns with hunters being disincentivized from hunting in the future because of CWD is something that we have had a conversation about within the department and really across the conservation community in the country. While we haven't seen any of those impacts to date, that certainly is something that is important, because we need hunters to harvest females, female big game animals in order to manage our wildlife resources in the state. So the underlying premise that he outlines, I think, has some real validity. So with that said, and he did a good job of outlining this as well, there's, we've had for my entire career, we've had people that have harvested animals and for one reason or the other have had an animal that's not edible. Sometimes you have them, they get injured. Sometimes they may have been shot by another hunter and still survived. We've had, even bull elk that have been injured by other bull elk, and because of that injury, the animal's unedible. And the approach we've taken in the past is that, when we sell a license, we're providing an opportunity to hunt and not a guarantee for an animal. And that, I think, gave rise to the amendment that Representative Jennings talked about, with really focusing this on CWD, and that language that he added there to provide that focus, I think, was in response to that concern of this expanding to, other problems that hunters may find when they've got a harvested animal that's just not edible. Currently, it takes, most of the time it's 3 to 5 days for a CWD sample to come back. However, during the peak of hunting season, when we have a lot of samples come in and the volume is high in our lab, sometimes it can take up to 3 weeks. That's what we tell hunters is, that's kind of the outside limit of how long it could take to return a sample. And so that could end up, as Representative Jennings pointed out, having a situation where the season's closed by the time a hunter receives their test results back. The other thing I would bring up is the specific numbers that he referenced as far as last year, what kind of numbers we would have been talking about. So we had a total of 342 samples from harvested elk last year, and that's all elk. And there was 36 of those that were positive for CWD. That was all elk, and so we can assume that about half of those, probably 18 of those elk, were cow elk. As far as white-tailed deer, there were 82 positive CWD samples last year for female white-tailed deer, and then 38 positive CWD samples for female mule deer. The fiscal impacts to this, because of those low numbers, are really negligible. They're not significant. Now, in the future, depending on where the disease go, where the interest from the public goes in obtaining samples, could, obviously increase that number. But at least if this were enacted today, it wouldn't be a significant fiscal impact for the agency. The other thing that is certainly a concern, and that I talked with Representative Jennings about last week, is we do go through a pretty robust process to set seasons. We involve stakeholders, all interests. Basically, we use science and data that our wildlife managers collect on the ground. And so it would add a little bit of complexity to that. We'd have to account for if there were areas that have high CWD prevalence, a certain amount of that harvest where we'd have to reissue licenses potentially. So that it would add another step, I guess, in season setting only in specific areas. This legislation could increase the number of samples, and that actually could be good and also problematic. If it was a significant amount in the areas where we're really targeting and we're trying to get more CWD samples, that would be helpful to the department. If it was a significant increase in areas where we don't really need any more samples, it would increase the caseload for the lab. The Representative Jennings did mention the CWD working group that was convened a little over a year ago and concluded their work last summer with the CWD management plan that we are implementing now. That group did have this discussion about license reimbursement for CWD positive animals, and they opted not to make a recommendation based on their study of this. The reasons for the changes with regards to cow elk versus antlerless elk is really just to bring this in line and conform with existing statutes. We don't sell cow elk licenses, we sell antlerless licenses and reduced price licenses. And so That's just simply a technical change. It doesn't change really the intent or the consequences of the bill. I appreciate the effective date change. We are not able to begin the formal process of promulgating a regulation that would enable us to enact this until it's actually signed into law. And so if that was this July, we wouldn't be able to do it without an emergency regulation by the next hunting season. So if it's effective at a later date, it gives us that opportunity to go through the formal rulemaking process and allow the commission to hear from the public on it. There are 3 other states we're aware of that have some kind of a similar program. It varies. Some states incentivize CWD sample collection by providing rewards for people who submit samples. There's one state anyway, that reimburses processing costs for those folks that have a positive CWD animal. But those are the only 3 that we're aware of that currently have anything similar to what the good representative has brought before you here today. And with that, Madam Chair, I would certainly stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director Nezvik. Committee questions for Director Nezvik? Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Director Nezvik. So I guess one question, obviously my area of the world is dead center for CWD, and I guarantee you that probably a majority of those positive cases come from my country. And so I'm on this bill as a co-sponsor for the fact that this is a very real issue for us. Meat hunters in our area have a decision to make every year, pretty much if they're going to be able to keep that animal or not due to the CWD testing. So my question would be, I know you mentioned a little bit that you think this could change. Do you expect that we would see a massive amount of increase in CWD sampling off of this? Or do you think it would probably just be kind of a side caveat for those that have had the disappointment of getting a CWD positive animal?
Director Nezvik?
Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson, anything I told you about, what I would expect in the future would be a lot of speculation without a lot of data to back it up. But what I will tell you is that as the awareness becomes more prominent, I think that, folks, there could be more folks. How many that is, I don't know. I do know that a lot of our constituents now that hunt big game animals they've made a decision one way or the other that, some are just simply not going to have them tested because they're not concerned. And some folks get a test every single year. And so I suspect those folks that are in that camp now that are just not real interested in having their stuff sampled before they eat it, probably aren't going to change their mind. But new hunters coming into the sport certainly could.
Director Nezvik, could you remind the committee just where the hot spots are for chronic wasting in the state? Representative Haroldson mentioned Platte County. Could you share that?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. So he's exactly right. The Laramie Range, which a good portion of the northern end of Albany County, the western side of Platte County, and the southern portion of Converse County, that's really kind of the epicenter of CWD in the state. However, with that said, we've now, we have CWD basically in all counties east of the Continental Divide, not every single hunt area, but most of them, and then a handful of them on the west side of the Continental Divide. So there are, there's other spots that have prevalence. The Snowy Range has an increased prevalence than what it did 10 years ago. And we've certainly seen some of the bighorns and over in the Black Hills as well.
Thank you. Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Nezvik, I'll just ask you straight out, are you in favor of this bill or not?
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah. So Madam Chair, Representative Winter, I sure appreciate the question. And, at the end of the day, if this bill is to pass, we can work through it. But I do have concerns with the bill, and I've had those discussions with Representative Jennings on what those concerns are.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I wonder if we're not just going down the wrong trail here. There's such a thing as it's called acts of God. And I experienced this before I sold my outfit. We had a big snowstorm in the mountains, and we had to pull camp, get out of there. And so I tried to get compensation for my hunters, either get them a new license or something, because we were not able to hunt, and to no avail. So there are lots of acts of God. And so I think this would be classified as another one. So I'm afraid that we're going to go down the wrong way here and really get into a jackpot somewhere along the line. So I'm really not in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions for Director Nezvik? I just had another one. Can you tell us why the chronic wasting disease group, they did discuss this and why they chose not to go down this road?
Madam Chair, I think there were multiple reasons, but the underlying and primary reason relates directly to the underlying philosophy of what we're selling a license to people for and what their expectation is. And the underlying philosophy is we're giving them an opportunity to hunt, not necessarily a guarantee to harvest an animal. And I think that's really where most of their conversation at the end of the day revolved around.
Thank you. Well, I don't think we have any further questions for you. We appreciate your time. If we have another, I suppose you'll still be with us, right?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I'll be here till you vote.
Okay, thank you, sir. And if we have anybody else from the executive branch, please raise your hand. Carla?
Madam Chair, I have two people that have their hands raised, but they had them raised before you asked for agency folks. So I'm not sure, but I can bring them in one at a time if you would like.
Okay, if they're on my list, I don't think they're with the agency. So I think we'll move to first legislators in the room and those in the room who'd like to testify, and then we'll come back unless, of course, we do have somebody online who's with the executive branch.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Representative Fortner, please come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks for joining us.
I too am a co-signer
Okay.
of this bill. And I believe it was last week, we had the roadkill bill come up about people getting the roadkill. I visited extensively with a man from the Game and Fish that was here lobbying against that bill. And he told me that Wyoming and the neighboring state of Colorado are the two most prominent states in the United States for chronic wasting disease. And he was worried that bill, people would pick that up and take it home. And that disease lives in water and it lives in ground, and other animals can pick it up. I think it's only fitting for Fish and Game or Game and Fish to reimburse somebody that buys license and goes out and harvests a tainted animal. You cannot tell this man says that you can harvest one, it'll look perfect. And then when they do the test, you'll find out that it's got chronic wasting disease. In the later stages, you can tell it pretty easy, he said. So with that being said, just by going off of what the man told me on that discussion on the roadkill, I believe that they should be reimbursed. People should be reimbursed under tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Fortner. Committee questions for Representative Fortner? Very good. Thank you for your time. All right. Do we have anybody else in the room who'd like to testify? If so, please come forward. Mr. Novotny, you raised your hand first. Sorry. Sure. Which badge are you boys wearing today?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Bill Novotny on behalf of the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association. I'm joined today by Mr. Lee Livingston, one of our past presidents. He is a member of our board and he's also on the board of state outfitters. Wyoming Outfitters and Guides stand in opposition to House Bill 227. First and foremost, we find that it would be discriminatory by not including out-of-state hunters that are the same, and actually most often more of the individuals who actually purchase these additional tags, whether it's a doe tag or a cow tag. We have long-term concerns about what the financial impact is going to be on the Game and Fish's budget, and then also concerns over management of the resource. But what really has my membership the most concerned about is that this is going to make a dramatic shift in what a hunting license is. Because basically we're moving it into becoming a contract between the state of Wyoming and hunter, guaranteeing them a specific outcome. In this case, the outcome is that you're going to harvest an animal that is disease-free. And in many cases, it is really impossible to detect if that animal has the disease at the time of take. A hunting license does not guarantee the recipient anything other than an opportunity. And with the outcome of this bill, we're moving our hunting licenses into an area that was never intended, and that being that guarantee of a specific outcome. So I urge you to look back at the work of the task force that really studied this, was filled with experts, and chose not to go down this path. And I would encourage you to go ahead and defeat this bill today, although we do appreciate the good work of the bringer to make sure that folks do stay engaged in hunting and help feed their families, fund the Game and Fish, and also control the resource. So thank you, Madam Chair. If there are not any questions for me, I would yield the floor to Mr. Lee Livingston from my board.
Thank you, Mr. Novotny. Questions? Representative Jennings?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So do you have, Mr. Novotny, do you have the amendments?
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes, sir.
Representative Jennings, I do not.
Oh. So in the amendments that is coming to you, one of the Fish and Game's amendments that I thought was a really good answer to that was that this is directed at meeting disease and wildlife management objectives. So we're not trying to, put it in change that you're selling the opportunity. In fact, I thought in testimony, I wanted to make that very clear. The sale is still an opportunity to go hunt, but the disease requires that we take some management things that are possibly put into our toolbox for the Fish and Game. Can you see that a place for that to be put in without changing the scope of how we sell a hunting license?
Mr. Novotny?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Jennings, I think that's going to be, again, one of those cases that once the camel's nose is under the tent, we are going to see ongoing wildlife issues, whether it's disease, predation, that is definitely going to require the Game and Fish to use all of the tools in their toolbox. But I'm going to stand with my testimony that I don't think that this is the appropriate thing to go forward with. I think that in the best way that the director could share his opinion without hedging the bill one way or the other, also express that. And again, I go back to the task force that spent months and months studying this and actually looked at what is being proposed here, and don't think it's the appropriate option to move forward with.
Thank you.
And I think that Mr. Livingston can share some other examples
Okay.
to that.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Lee Livingston, as Mr. Novotny said, board member for Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association, state board member for Wyoming Outfitters and professional guides, 36-year outfitting professional in Northwest Wyoming. And I'm not going to touch on any of the points that Mr. Novotny already did. I just share concerns that this might have unintended consequences moving forward. I have, as I think Mr. Winter has had hunters who have lost their game to grizzlies. We try everything we can. We've changed the way we hunt and the way we go about things in the field to avoid that situation, but it does happen. And when that happens, to avoid conflict, we back away from it. And the hunter has he's got a tag that's been punched and has no opportunity to get another tag and go, hunt another animal. So it's, again, I appreciate the intent of the bill, and I understand for someone that's just wanting to go out there and put meat in the freezer. Every hunter, I hope, is wanting to put meat in the freezer, whether it's a antlerless or antlered animal. But I just am concerned about, the possible unintended consequences of this on down the road. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions? Yes, Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Novotny, you mentioned that your concerns about this being the, nose under the tent. And I apologize if I didn't fully hear all of that, but are you speaking to that in the sense of that once we open the door to chronic wasting disease, that we'll be looking for excuses for reimbursement for other disease, defects, problems, anything that isn't a perfect record-setting set of antlers, et cetera?
Mr. Novotny.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Hunt, I think you articulated it way better than I possibly could. It's exactly that. We are going to continue to see diseases impact wildlife. And so once you moved to this policy change, that it is no longer about the experience, that it's about a guaranteed outcome, then absolutely, it's just that.
Further questions? All right, thank you both. We appreciate your testimony. Wyoming Wildlife.
Chairwoman Flitner, members of the committee, Jesse Johnson, the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I will skip a good portion of some of the things I was going to talk about, because when I look up there, I see the two chairmen of the CWD working group are with their hands raised. What I do want to say on a couple of things is that the state of Wyoming, we've known about CWD since 1985, and our license applications have done nothing but stay steady and go up. Resident applications for doe fawn deer were up 20% last year. They were up 10% for antlerless elk in 2020 as well. And so we're looking at the demand is not going down. While I very much, I think, respect and hear where this bill is trying to get at, I defer to the working group's decision to not include this in their list of recommendations. When we look at tag reissues as being a problem, we can look at how it was affected by the Mullen fire that happened this year. It's a nightmare to have to try and wade through that. And the good representative talked earlier about customer experience, and reissuing licenses takes opportunity away from next year's applicants to meet management objectives. And that's not a great customer experience for the possible new hunters or the people that would be applying that year. And so kind of looking at this as a fair thing, looking at it as not a guaranteed outcome, like we were talking and referring to the previous testimony. I would just say that this bill has great intent, but I don't think in action would be something that we would like to see our tag allocations go to. And with that, I think I will stand for any questions. I would say, deferring to what the working group leaders will say, we will stand behind as well.
Questions for Ms. Johnson? All right, since you noted them, would you please invite each of them one at a time to maybe turn their camera on? And Carla, if you'd please allow them in, and we can hear from them while Ms. Johnson is at the table.
Absolutely. It is Kristen Gunther and Joshua Corsi.
Here they come, Madam Chairman.
Very good. Hi, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Kristen Gunther, and as Ms. Johnson noted, I'm here in sort of two capacities today. One is as a representative of the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and the other is, as was noted, as a co-chair of the statewide chronic wasting disease working group. My fellow co-chair, Josh Corsi, is also here and has joined us. And so I'm gonna just share some reflections and some information about the working group, just to give a little bit of context and some information about how we reached the decisions that we did. And then Josh will also jump into some specifics related to some of the concerns we had around tag reissues and refunds. I first wanted to thank the committee today for taking up this issue. Chronic wasting disease is an incredibly important topic. And I also wanted to echo previous statements, thanking the bringers of this bill for thinking about the future management of chronic wasting disease. Although we're here in opposition to this bill today, I think we very much appreciate the intent. And as Ms. Johnson said, very much understand what the bill is trying to get to. And hopefully by explaining a little bit about the working group and how we had our conversation, I think I can maybe provide some context for how we reached our decision. So just very briefly, a little bit about the why and how of the working group. There were 31 members that were convened from around the state. It was a relatively diverse membership. We had representatives coming from agriculture, county commissions, we had a state legislator, multiple government agencies, sportsmen and women were represented, as well as outfitters, conservation groups, and several seats for the general public, and also folks representing veterinary sciences. So that's how you get to a 31-member working group. The reason the group was convened was that Game and Fish, and I think it's to the real credit of the department, that they recognized this, knowing that they needed to update their chronic wasting disease plan, wanted to go to the public first. And so held a series of public meetings where feedback was gathered, convened this group. When we started our meetings to have conversations about what we might, as a group, be comfortable recommending, we had a giant spreadsheet of feedback from all around the state that was really helpful in guiding some of our early conversations. And so over the course of meetings in 2019 and 2020, we worked through a set of recommendations. We tried out a lot of ideas. We didn't always agree. Obviously, in a group of 31, you will not always find consensus, but we actually found a lot of agreement and produced several dozen recommendations that we gave to the Game and Fish Department that ultimately fed into their new updated chronic wasting disease plan. Committee members worked hard, engaged their constituencies in between meetings that looked variable depending on how folks, what interest folks represented. But we had members that were calling every meat processor in the state of Wyoming they could get their hands on a phone number for, just to make sure we were getting as much feedback and input as we possibly could. And so when it's been mentioned several times that we actually took on this particular topic, in a slightly different context, but discussing the idea of, would it ever be acceptable? Is it something we want to recommend that the Game and Fish should look at reissuing or refunding tags for chronic wasting disease positive animals? And I think we too thought it would be a reasonable thing to debate. So we had a number of long conversations about it. And the more we discussed it, the more troubled we were by just some of the implications. And some of these things have been mentioned already. Mr. Corsi will discuss some of the specific concerns we had just around reissuing and the sort of administrative logistics associated with something like this. But ultimately, we came to the conclusion that it would probably do more harm than good to seriously consider this. And we decided that we didn't want to put it in the Game and Fish Department's toolbox. I want to emphasize that a lot of personal knowledge was brought to this conversation. I think most folks on the committee had the experience of having an animal test positive or knew somebody that had happened to and understood that it's devastating. I mean, you're looking at meat that you were going to put in the freezer and now you can't, or you have to make a really hard choice about it. So we took it very seriously. But ultimately, the common thread that linked together a lot of the concerns that our group shared was what you've heard about hunting being an opportunity versus a guarantee of a product. Ultimately, a lot of folks just thought we didn't want to change the way people think about hunting in the state of Wyoming, that when you purchase a license, that you are purchasing the chance to hunt wild, free-ranging wildlife. And that's what you're purchasing. We really didn't want to get folks in a consumer mindset where the wildlife itself is the product. And a lot of different folks felt pretty strongly about that. We didn't want to sort of set up the idea that you're entitled to a refund or another shot, even if you have a really disappointing and upsetting result at the end of the day. Hunting is full of risk and rewards. And I think all or most of us recognize that in the discussion. And so that's essentially what led into our decision. We also, we are aware that sometimes there's a conception that, you can visually inspect an animal and know if it's CWD positive. That's not the case most of the time until the very last stages of the disease. I'm sure many of us know somebody who has had the experience of shooting a deer and been really surprised when it came back positive because it looks very healthy. The disease takes a fair amount of time to run its course. So often people don't know, most of the time people really don't know that they're shooting a sick animal. And so exactly as you've heard earlier, we were concerned that if we open the door a crack, all of a sudden we have a whole raft of other questions that follow. We've set a precedent for the idea of reissuing or refunding tags. Why not other types of tags? Why not full refunds? Why not other diseases and other challenges? And I won't repeat those points. So for all of those reasons, I think we feel really strongly that while we appreciate the intent of the bill and absolutely appreciate the discussion today, that we would encourage the committee to vote in opposition to this bill, but we do support your interest in chronic wasting disease and hope that everyone stays engaged in this topic and supportive of Wyoming Game and Fish in their new efforts to take on the disease. And with that, Mr. Corsi will have more, but I will sit for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gunther. And I don't see anybody raising their hands. Mr. Corsi, if you have anything new information to add beyond what Ms. Gunther's already gone over, please join us.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, again, I thank you for the time. There has been a lot of information that's put out in opposition to this, and many of that has been united as we've heard from others. A couple of things I would like to add that would just give maybe a little more insight to the process of the working group, that specific to the layers of just the logistics and the protocols within the department. Deputy Director Edberg, who was the lead with the working group on this issue, certainly he had his homework as we started to ask these questions. And although Director Nezvik said that he'll take the marching orders and lead, that's the director and that's his job, and he's set to do that. Deputy Director Edberg certainly indicated not only from the department's fiscal responsibilities, but also the layers that this would add in inconvenience and just management from the testing lab. It certainly provided some more work that would definitely need to be accounted for. Beyond that, I would like to add one other piece that I think is very important that hasn't been touched on yet, because I certainly don't want to reiterate something that's been said. But I do think that Commissioner Livingston mentioned that the unintended consequences of this and opening that door. And in that same breath, I would like to add that we have seen a very new disease on the landscape that has come about in Wyoming, in Western Wyoming particularly, since 2015, that has the poster child appearance of CWD by all accounts from physical view, but upon testing was CWD negative, and that is adenovirus. And that is a fairly new disease to the landscape in Wyoming. But I think, again, when you start talking about where this opens the door and where it could potentially lead, I think these issues are far and broad, and I think that we should give strong consideration to the complexities of this, and knowing that there really is no simple solution for such a complex problem. And so with that, I would continue and urge you again in opposition to this, but I also think, as the co-chair with me, Kristen, had mentioned, I thank you for your interest in this issue. It does deserve all the limelight it can get. And I thank you, Representative Jennings, for your genesis on what brought this bill forward. And I hope and continue to ask for your engagement to this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Corsi. Committee questions for Mr. Corsi? Thank you both. We appreciate your time.
Madam Chairwoman, I wonder if I might offer one small follow-up, is just around the meat issue about, we've all had an animal that's tested positive at some point. And looking at the First Lady's initiative with the Food from the Field and the Hunger Initiative there, and then Wyoming Wildlife Federation runs our own thing called Hunters for the Hungry, where folks are donating excess meat that has tested positive, or not positive, has tested negative for chronic wasting disease. So there are options if it is meat that the families are after, and raising the notoriety of the Food from the Field initiative of First Lady Jenny Gordon, as well as our Hunters for the Hungry, is an option for them to go to with that. And with that, thank you again. I reiterate all of the thanks for the intent on this and everything that you guys are doing to work on this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We appreciate that. And thanks for noting those charitable organizations. Appreciate that. All right. Do we have anybody else in the room who'd like to step forward and testify? And I'm not seeing anybody, but I do see we have one more person online who'd like to testify. Mr. Dobrik, is that correct?
Madam Chairman, he doesn't have his hand raised,
Okay.
but now he does. Here he comes.
Well, he's not being forced to testify if he doesn't want to. Did I scare him away? Nope, I didn't. There he is. Hello, Mr. Dobrik.
Madam Chair, Committee, Nick Dobrich. I live in DuBois.
Can you step a little closer to the microphone, please?
Can you hear me now?
It's barely.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. I live in DuBois and I work for Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, a sportsman's conservation group. And I too served on the CWD task force. And I remember the good conversation we had around this issue, just to echo Kristen and Josh in terms of their comments, that we took this issue seriously. And I really appreciate the intent, again, of the sponsor of this bill. CWD is a huge issue for our state, and our organization is working to advocate for additional federal funds to get to the state to help with this issue. I could see this as being a really positive topic for an interim committee to see how the legislator could help the game and fish and our state to help with CWD as well as future issues in the future. But I too am opposed to this bill. I think, as people have said before, the opportunity, as well as it's an administrative nightmare, it seems like, in the future. And I haven't seen the amendments, so, but I would assume that even with those amendments, I would probably still be opposed to the bill. But thank you, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dobrik. Committee questions? Thank you. We appreciate your time. So no further testimony. We will call public testimony to a close. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chairman, Director Nezvik has his hand raised.
Okay.
I'll bring him in then.
All right. Thank you.
Here he comes.
Director, welcome back.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. Very, very quickly here. I did want to address something, and I apologize. I usually do this early in the session with the committees I testify at. So I did want to address the comment made by Representative Fortner regarding the department lobbying. And I will just tell you that, our role as the executive branch is not to influence individual members on any particular legislation, but rather to provide information and then to offer opinions when we have the appropriate requisite experience to offer opinions on different impacts to the agency. When Representative Fortner talked about being lobbied by a member of the department, I'm certainly interested in that, and I will follow up with him. But none of my senior leadership team has had a discussion with him about this. And sometimes, and I don't know that this is the case here, but sometimes it does happen where a separate organization from the department, many of you are familiar with the Wyoming Game Wardens Association. They're a 501c3. They're a separate organization from the department. Their membership is oftentimes, it's made up of game wardens from our department. However, they operate separately. They do any work they do with the Wardens Association on their own time. If they're driving to testimony, they drive on their own dime, and they operate completely separately. And I suspect maybe that's the case here, but I wanted to make that real clear for the committee that my direction to my folks is that we will not be engaged in lobbying in any way, shape, or form in the traditional sense. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate the clarification. Thank you. All right, committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Haroldson. Seconded by Jennings. Okay. So committee, I tracked in the amendments, and I don't know if anybody else had the opportunity, but since I did track them in, let's just go through the bill, beginning on page 1, line 8. after subsection N on line 8, you would insert 0, I believe that's what. Yeah, N and 0, or N, just delete the and N and insert N and 0, which is kind of odd. I just wrote in the 0 next to the N. Or O, yeah, an O, not a 0, my apologies. Moving on to page 2. And it deletes the word cow on line 1. And then on line 2, hunting license who takes a cow, you would remove a cow and insert an antlerless elk. Moving on down to line 6 on page 2, after WS, where it says pursuant to WS Wyoming statute, you would insert 23-2-101 subsection D and the word or. On line 7, you would delete replacement cow and insert reissued. I have antlerless. That was my own question, sorry. Moving on to line 9 and take out the word replacement and insert reissued. So it would be commission approves the reissued license. And then on line 10, you delete it entirely and insert the language, the immediately following season. On line 12, after Wyoming, delete the word doe. On line 13, delete a doe and insert an antlerless. On line 17, after WS, pursuant to Wyoming statute, you would insert 23-2-101 subsection D and the word or. At the end of line 17, you would delete replacement and track in the word reissued. On line 18, you would delete the word doe. On line 20, you would delete replacement and insert reissued. And on line 21, delete that entirely and insert the immediately following season period. And then immediately below line 22, you would insert subsection O, which states, nothing in subsections M or N of this section shall be construed to guarantee that a license holder will take an animal for which a license is issued. The purpose of subsections M and N of this section is solely to provide reissued licenses or refunds for license holders who legally harvest chronic wasting, disease-positive, antlerless, white-tailed deer, mule deer, or elk to help the commission meet disease and wildlife management objectives. And then on page 3, line 7, you would delete the year 2021 and insert 2022. And that is the amendment tracked in, and I think we need to move the amendment. Representative Jennings, correct? And I would so move. Haroldson seconds. All right.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir. Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just on a point of technical clarification on line 20 of page 2. So currently the language reads, we're striking out replacement, putting in reissued, but it says after that license to be, license to be used in another, striking out that bottom of that line 21 and saying the immediately following season. And I think we need to strike another as well. So
Representative Hunt, I agree. So is that an amendment to the amendment?
that is an amendment to the amendment.
And I second. So Barb, do you have that? Okay, so first we'll vote on the amendment to the amendment. Does everybody understand that? It just reads better. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Amendment to the amendment passes. We're back on the amendment. Any conversation on the amendment? Question on the amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. All right, the amendment passes. We are back on the bill. Any comments, committee? Representative Knapp.
Madam Chair, So good discussion, and as everybody has testified today, I think the intent of the bill was a good one. But taking into consideration in making decisions, we've heard from experts, which is the working group, who took the time and had the members, quite a variety of members in that working group, did not go down this path. And the department, not lobbying, did have concerns that echoed that group. Then finally, the public, and I was a little bit surprised that this was such a passionate issue amongst hunters, that they did not want to see this go through. And I think it goes to my own opinion, which I put last, is the consistency. I think in policy, we need to have consistency. And the consistency in this is, and we've heard it over and over again, is it's an opportunity, not an outcome. And I think that policy is important to stay consistent. And along with the testimony, I would be against the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further comment, committee? Well, I appreciate that. And while I appreciate your bill and your efforts, and I think I'm going to have to go with what Representative Knapp just said. So if there's no further comment, Barb, would you please call the roll?
Representative Banks, no. Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Hunt.
No.
Representative Jennings. Representative Knapp.
No.
Vice Chairwoman Newsom, no. Representative Sweeney, no. Representative Winter.
Oh,
Chairwoman Flitner.
No.
2 aye, 7 no.
Thank you, Barb. We appreciate it. And Representative Jennings, thank you. We appreciate that. All right. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. Carla, thank you. And thank everybody online who took the time to testify. We thank you, and this committee is adjourned.